evening. I'm Melissa Ridgen with your APTN National News. We begin with the pandemic and a First Nation in northwestern Ontario calling on the Canadian military for help with a COVID outbreak. Bearskin Lake declared a state of emergency after more than half of its 400 members tested positive for the virus. Michelle Karlenzig has more on that story.
Over half the community in Bearskin Lake First Nation have tested positive for COVID-19. Chief Lefty Kamanawatimin says he lost staff and health workers at an alarming rate.
I don't have a medical driver. I don't have a medical vehicle. And I don't have a person to answer the phone that is constantly ringing at the nursing station. And the workers are sick. And at the band office, I don't have a receptionist or a secretary because they're positive.
The chief also is isolating after his son tested positive. He says the situation is dire and has called for help from Canada's government and military.
The case of
This
Bearskin
afternoon,
Lake, in
Minister of
addition to
Indigenous Affairs, Patty Haidu, addressed the First Nations crisis.
We've recently approved 2 additional funding allotments totaling about $900,000, and this is within days of receiving requests from the community.
The chief says he's thankful for the support, but due to lack of staff, he won't see that money anytime soon.
I only have one finance person working in the band office now, so the finance department is depleted too, so it's really, really slow.
In the meantime, Bearskin Lake has received an outpour of support from neighboring communities like Big Trout Lake First Nation. They sent a team of snowmobiles filled with supplies in the frigid temperatures on New Year's Day. The chief said he's thankful.
There's so many communities that have stepped up with monetary donations, supplies, equipment. First Nations, businesses, organizations are contacting us to help. It just overwhelms me. It overwhelms me. It just speaks that the compassion a person has, a community has, in a time of need.
The chief says he hopes to be out of isolation in the coming days, and he can help check on the members of his community. Michelle Karlenzig, APTN National News, Winnipeg.
Advocate Tanya Cameron is just one of the many people who are helping out. They're raising money for food, supplies, and even log splitters for the community. She spoke to Dennis Ward about how things are going.
Tanya, great to see you. Thanks for being with us.
Hi, thanks for inviting me.
At what point did you decide to start this fundraiser?
Well, it was New Year's Eve, actually. I had spent a few days watching developments on social media of the COVID outbreak in Bearskin Lake First Nation. I saw a post by Saul Memakwa. He's the MPP for Kuwaitno, and Bearskin Lake is one of the First Nations that he represents. And I was really moved by what I've heard and saw in the community, so I thought I would like to help.
How many donations have you received for Bearskin Lake?
Well, I just checked my emails and I keep an Excel spreadsheet, so I'm just surpassed 22,000.
Oh, wow. Well, from the Facebook post, it seems you've had help from all over Ontario, Manitoba. How has this helped your mission here?
The response right across the country has been tremendous, and it would be about 270 donors so far. I was able to work once again with Fresh Market Foods in Sulakaut, and I sent them $12,000 and a grocery list from the community. And just today, I'm actually on my way back to Kenora. I sent about $7,000 worth of air purifiers for the community.
Incredible stuff. Tanya, what's been the feedback from Bearskin Lake?
They are so appreciative. I was actually listening to a radio update from Chief Cam, and they are overwhelmed with support by neighboring communities and people that have just been offering support to the community. So I'm just grateful to have some role to help alleviate some of the concerns that are in the community, groceries being one of the #1 things, and now I'm moving my focus to look at different supplies that's needed within the community.
Well, our thoughts are with the community, and Tanya, can't thank you enough for being with us here and also for all the work that you always do with these types of fundraisers. Appreciate it.
Miigwech.
So much respect for Tanya. She's always doing such good stuff. Well, to the Middle Province now, the Winnipeg Police Service has declared a state of emergency, saying roughly 13% of staff are on COVID leave. This comes after yesterday's announcement to keep kids at home here until January 27th. Michelle Carr-Lenzig has a rundown of the COVID situation here in Manitoba.
Winnipeg's police services are shuffling workers due to COVID-19 cases. Chief of Police Danny Smythe has called a state of emergency.
We had roughly about 90, we were dealing with about 90 positive cases, and we had about 172 people off on sick leave. What that meant for us is just to redeploy some of our current resources to ensure that we have proper resources in General Patrol.
Smythe says there are no current shortages of officers on the street and response times will not be affected. School children in Manitoba will follow other provinces by moving to remote learning until January 17th. The news came yesterday from Education Minister Cliff Cullen.
This extra week of remote learning will provide time for distribution of additional masks and rapid tests to schools across the province.
Premier Heather Stephenson emphasized why they made the move.
That this is about the education stakeholders asking for an extension to put the appropriate measures in place to ensure the further safety for kids in-class learning.
Children of essential workers will continue to learn in person. And Manitoba's testing process is officially shifting because of backlogs. Dr. Jazz Atwal announced most people who get tested will receive a rapid test instead of a PCR.
This is to preserve our laboratory testing capacity.
Atwal says the province is estimating missing 8 to 10 Omicron cases for every single reported case. If that's correct, the latest batch of 9,000 new cases since Friday could be closer to 70,000. Michelle Carr-Lenzig, APTN National News, Winnipeg.
Thanks, Michelle. Well, Nunavut began seeing cases of COVID-19 right before Christmas on the rise there. Since then, cases have been steadily on the rise, despite the lockdown that was put in place by the territorial government. Our Kent Driscoll has the latest from Iqaluit.
Nunavut now has 244 active cases of COVID-19 in 12 of Nunavut's 25 communities. Nunavut's premier read off the roll call today to reporters at the Legislative Assembly.
48 in Arvian, 1 in Baker Lake, 1 in Cambridge Bay, 2 in Chesterfield Inland, 17 in Idlirik, 72 here in Iqaluit, 23 in Kingain, 19 in Pannato, 1 in Pond Inlet, 5 in Qikiqtadzwa, 45 in Rankin Inlet, and 10 in Sanaraya.
This might be the last time we have such accurate testing numbers. The health department has decided to only do full testing on cases in communities that don't have any positive cases. If you live in a Nunavut community that already has COVID, they're no longer going to do full testing. Nunavut's chief public health officer explains just what is being gained in exchange for the loss of the testing.
It frees up lab staff to ensure that they're available for other diagnostics that are just as important. The same people who test blood for heart attacks and diabetes and other conditions, including tuberculosis, not blood, but do the test for it, are doing the COVID tests. And if the volume of COVID testing continued to increase as it has in the last 2 weeks, something had to give.
Everything but essential government offices are closed. But Nunavut's premier urged one group to turn out for work: daycare workers.
I want to make a special plea to Nunavut daycares. We need you more than ever before. I am asking that you reopen your doors to help our critical services operational. Our healthcare workers, store employees, water and waste management workers must go above and beyond to help our territory during this severe wave of COVID-19. Many of these critical services are now close to the breaking point. Staff are exhausted, balancing work as well as childcare, which is unsustainable for many.
Since this latest outbreak, Nunavut officials have been saying the healthcare system is near a breaking point. Now, with testing only being done in a limited fashion, it seems like the territory is closer to that breaking point. Kent Driscoll, APTN National News, Iqaluit.
Earlier this week, Wet'suwet'en Clan and supporters abandoned their blockade in northern British Columbia. Coastal GasLink Pipeline, the company that's involved in the dispute, they say they will now resume work on the project. APTN's Lee Wilson has more.
In mid-December, members of the Gidimt'en clan reoccupied a blockade site known as Coyote Camp at a Coastal GasLink drill site for over 2 weeks. The Wet'suwet'en clan, along with supporters, say they're upholding an eviction by Wet'suwet'en hereditary chiefs from 2020 who remain opposed to the natural gas pipeline in their territory located in northern BC. According to a press release from the Gidimt'en Access Point, the group controlling access, they left the drill site blockade to evade potential arrest by RCMP. CGL put out a statement. They will resume work in the territory. On Monday, January 3rd, 2020, Coastal GasLink confirmed opposition group had departed the Martin Forest Service Road and Maurice River drill site. Work is safely resuming along the Coastal GasLink project route after the holiday break. The company has a BC Supreme Court injunction in the area. The 670-kilometer natural gas pipeline is 60% complete, according to the company. In an email statement to APTN News, RCMP say they're doing patrols to ensure access on the Forestry Road, but had no update. We will continue to follow this developing story. Lee Wilson, APTN National News, Kitimat.
Time for us to take a quick break, but when we come back, a big win for former kids in care as the feds say they will be compensated for the broken system that they were forced into. Stay with us. Welcome back. It is the largest class action lawsuit settlement in Canadian history. The cost, $40 billion, as the federal government announced an agreement in principle to settle these lawsuits that cover First Nations children shortchanged by a woefully underfunded child welfare system. APTN's Fraser Needham has more.
It's been a long time coming, but Ottawa says it believes it has reached an agreement that will satisfy a 2019 Canadian Human Rights Tribunal order and also those covered under class action lawsuits going back to 1991. The price tag is $20 billion. The government's Indigenous Services Minister says lessons have been learned after decades of legal wrangling.
I hope the lesson that we're learning, as I said earlier, is that discriminatory funding for Indigenous people in this country is not just harmful and wrong and morally repugnant, but that it is shooting ourselves in the foot in terms of prosperity for the entire country.
AFN Regional Chief Cindy Woodhouse says a chronically underfunded system set up First Nations children and their families to fail.
This wasn't and isn't about parenting, it's in fact about poverty. And First Nations children being removed from their families and communities instead of being provided help with food, clothing, or shelter. The federal child welfare program was broken from the start.
Affected children and their families will be guaranteed a minimum of $40,000 each, but compensation on a case-by-case basis could be much higher. An additional $20 billion is going to overall reform of the First Nations child welfare system. One Ontario First Nations leader says Ottawa has finally set aside enough money to properly compensate the harms that have been done.
For our remote communities, empirical, math-based solutions to these problems have been unheard of. I'm proud that we have finally identified a promising way forward in this agreement in principle through meaningful structural change.
But children's advocate Cindy Blackstock says her organization is not ready to drop its complaint just yet.
When Canada has ceased its discrimination in the provision of First Nations Child and Family Services and Jordan's principle at the level of the child. That's where we measure it, not on paper. Are children no longer discriminated against in a way that the tribunal found?
The agreement is expected to cover an estimated 215,000 individuals. Fraser Needham, APTN National News, Ottawa.
Dennis Ward put a few questions about the deal to Indigenous Services Minister Patty Hajdu. Here is that conversation.
Minister Hajdu, thanks for taking some time for us. These agreements in principle are non-binding and still need to be ratified, so what could go wrong here?
Well, I'd rather talk about what's gone right, actually. And what's gone right is, for the first time in a very long time, all of the parties have sat down together, worked out, I would say, extremely difficult details to arrive at a fairly comprehensive agreement in principle. All have signed the agreement in principle and now are committed to the next work ahead, which is to flesh that agreement in principle out, get those details in place, and have a final agreement that that is to the satisfaction of all parties, but also is approved by the federal court and the Canadian Human Rights Tribunal.
Well, you know, a lot of people do believe this could be a historic moment here. It's a big deal, but Cindy Blackstock, who helped file this original complaint in 2007, said that, quote, "Nothing changes in the lives of children today. These are simply words on paper." So what would you say to Ms. Blackstock and others who could be concerned that this is another broken Liberal promise?
Well, I wouldn't call $40 billion a broken Liberal promise, Dennis. In fact, I want to thank Dr. Blackstock for being a signatory on the agreement in principle. Her signature is on it, as well as you know, AFN and the Chiefs of Ontario and the Anishinaabe Nation folks and Mishoom and Trout class litigators. You know, this is the result of conversations over the last 6 weeks that were, I would say, ongoing and persistent. I think Regional Chief Woodhouse said it best. There were difficult moments where people didn't agree on a path forward, but everyone committed to coming back to the table. And I will note that Honourable Murray Sinclair was a key ingredient in facilitating that conversation and keeping us all focused on what mattered, which was the future for Indigenous children, but certainly also a fair compensation regime for people that have been so harmed by discrimination and racist funding practices in the past.
You seem confident this will move ahead. So tens of thousands of First Nations families and children are affected by this agreement in principle. Should it all move ahead smoothly, I should say, how quickly could they see compensation?
Well, certainly I think everybody's focused now on the compensation and making sure that it's done in a fair, in an appropriate, and in a safe way, culturally safe way that doesn't re-traumatize individuals that have been traumatized, sometimes by a life of inequity. Many of us who have worked in community before politics will remember, you know, the common experience payment and the independent experience payments that in some cases were very difficult for people to access, and some processes were very re-traumatizing. And that's why we've committed to First Nations partners that they'll lead the design of the compensation package. They'll put into place the appropriate approach that will ensure that compensation unfolds quickly, but also carefully in a way that meets the needs of Indigenous First Nations people that have been so harmed.
That said, though, Minister, are we talking weeks, months?
Well, it's hard to say. We need to get to a final agreement first, and of course, we're hoping to do that as quickly as possible. I will say that parties are hard at work already in what that final agreement will look like, and you know, we'll be there. We'll be there for the First Nations leadership and organizations that will design this program. Our contribution, as you know, is a commitment to the adequate funding so that that compensation can unfold in a way that obviously will never restore people, but will certainly acknowledge the harms and help give people, you know, some comfort that their harms are recognized.
Minister Haidu, we'll have to leave it there, but I appreciate you taking some time for us.
Thank you very much, Dennis. Take care.
Nation to Nation host Brett Forrester had the chance to sit down with Canada's first Indigenous Governor-General, Mary Simon. Here's a portion of that interview where she shares how she avoided residential school.
A lot of my friends were sent out to residential school, but because my father married my mother, who was a unilingual Inuk woman, we were told we weren't eligible to be educated, so we never went to residential school. In fact, my father was our teacher for the next few years during my high school. We were homeschooled. So during that time it was difficult, but in hindsight, it's probably the best thing that happened to me.
You can check out that entire interview on our website, aptnnews.ca/nation to nation. Well, it is time for another break, but we've got lots of more news still ahead. Stay with us. We go to Alberta now, where some Siksika Nation members began the new year with new digital skills in information technology. Those new skills come in handy with rural connectivity challenges and remote learning. Tamara Pimentel has that story.
Digital divide is very real for First Nations. It's something we face every day.
With the pandemic comes many technology challenges on Indigenous communities, from online schooling to just poor wireless connection. But on Siksika Nation, the information technology sector got a boost when 25 of its members completed training. David Pantherbone is with the IT department at Siksika Health.
There's a lot of challenges the pandemic has brought. We're working on an internet connectivity project to actually bring fiber and enhance our wireless on the reserve here to kind of combat that digital divide.
The program was brought on by the Blackfoot Tech Council and CompTIA, a nonprofit for the IT industry. 15 trainees are in paid practicums with other departments on the nation. For Tribal Manager Richard Sparvier, an IT specialist that understands the challenges of living on reserve goes a long way.
Easier way to connect with somebody who you potentially know or might know through another family member or friend than it would be to connect with somebody who's many miles away on the phone or something else. It's a bit more personalized.
Tamara Pimentel, APTN National News, Calgary.
Well, we have some unfortunate news about our NHL coverage. Hockey lovers hoping to watch the games in Plains Cree are going to have to wait. Hockey Night in Canada in Cree on APTN is going to be pushed back due to surging COVID cases. The program was set to air on APTN next weekend. The deal with Sportsnet is the first of its kind and features 4 Cree commentators. The broadcast will now kick off on March 5th for the Vancouver and Toronto game, barring any other pandemic delays. And we have some even more bad news. In case you hadn't heard, over the holiday, prominent comedian Candy Palmater passed away. The talented and funny star of The Candy Show was 53 years old. Palmater's partner and manager Denise Tompkins posted to social media that the Mi'kmaq comedian, activist, and actor had passed away at home. A virtual memorial will take place soon. Here she is in season 1 from The Candy Show in 2010.
I'm Shania Knockwood, and we're here tonight with Jim Jones.
She was loved and will certainly be missed. Well, that is all the time we have for your APTN National News tonight. I'm Melissa Ridgen. Have a great evening.